I'm here at the Saratoga National Battlefield. It was here that two battles took place in September and October of 1777 that changed the course of American history. This is where the turning point happened of the American Revolution. In these fields beyond this cannon is where Burgoyne was stopped by the Americans under Benedict Arnold and Horatio Gates. There are actually two battles at Saratoga, one in September and one in October. In September, Burgoyne had gotten about this far down the Hudson River, and he's going to be stopped by an American army under Horatio Gates, a little further south of where we are right now. Now you can see from the sign, this is where the Battle of Freeman's Farm took place on September 19, 1777. You can see on the map where Burgoyne's forces were. This would be north of where the Americans are. And the Americans will send out a reconnaissance under a guy named Dan Morgan and his riflemen. And that's what I'm dressed as right now, as a rifleman. And what had happened on that day on September 19th was when Morgan came out of the fortifications to kind of see what Burgoyne was doing, there is a fight that takes place. And that becomes the Battle of Freeman's Farm. Now, Freeman's Farm is actually named after a guy named Freeman who owned land right here, and this happened to be where the armies began to fight. It's a seesaw battle for that day. Eventually, the Americans do withdraw, and the British claim a victory. However, Burgoyne's forces were kind of stuck, not moving forward, and a month later will be the second battle called the Battle of Bemis' Heights. Standing in front of a monument to Thaddeus Kosciuszko, who was a brilliant military engineer and helped the American Army fortify this area against the British coming south from Canada. Now, he himself is an example of the international aspect of the American Army. Many people from other countries came and actually were in the American Army. He happens to be from what is today Poland, and he is added to the ranks like many others that fought for the American cause during the American Revolution. Blue and white stakes that you see all around me. This is the extent of the American fortifications here at the Neilson Farmhouse. The Neilson Farmhouse became the headquarters to the American Army during September and October of 1777. So the fortifications were laid out. It's a pretty good position. The American command would meet in this very house, which most of it's still original. People like Benedict Arnold, Horatio Gates, Dan Morgan, all met on this spot in October and September of 1777. The reason why the Americans chose this site, the Neilson Farmhouse, is because of its high ground. There is the river out that way. You can't see because the trees are blocking it. But Burgoyne is coming from that direction, from the north. And the Americans decided, under Horatio Gates, that they would fortify the high ground so that Burgoyne could not get past this point. Also, the Americans are watching the river, so Burgoyne is basically forced to be in that position. And if he wants to attack the Americans, he has to attack uphill. The fortifications up at Neilson's farm stretched all the way down this way, all the way down to the river, which is beyond those trees, which you can't see. Kosciuszko, the engineer, designed this fortification leading up to Neilson's farm to block the British advance, which was coming from the north. So Burgoyne was coming up from that direction. The Americans are fortifying here, covering the river, and they're also fortifying the high ground up at Neilson's farm. So it was a great defensive position that Burgoyne really couldn't get past unless he tried to go around on the landward side. This is a monument to Timothy Murphy, who fought in Dan Morgan's unit of Riflemen at the Battle of Bemis Heights on October 7th, 1777. And it was there that the importance of the rifleman really becomes at the forefront of the American combat experience. Timothy Murphy was in a tree. He fired a shot a couple of 100 yards away from a British general named Simon Fraser. After Simon Fraser was killed on that day, or mortally wounded at first, the British resolve basically expired and they began to retreat. So the importance of riflemen can be shown at this particular battle in October of 1777. This is a rifleman. Rifleman is a very different soldier than a soldier that carries a musket. The rifle has rifling in the barrel, which allows the projectile to have greater range and accuracy. So this rifle can hit something at about 300 yards. Now, rifles don't carry bayonets. They're not used for hand-to-hand combat. They're mainly used for hunting by backwoods riflemen. Now, during the war and at the battles of Saratoga, the American forces used these rifles to a great extent. And especially on the second day when Timothy Murphy makes that shot against Simon Fraser, he hits him at a couple of 100 yards range and changes the whole course of the battle. So these weapons were used to great effectiveness by the American forces. Other weapons that would have been used in the American Revolution, not just muskets, not just rifles, but also hand-to-hand weapons, such as tomahawk, which I have with me, hand-forged, used for hand-to-hand combat in the North American continent, used by Native Americans and the colonists as well. Very effective in close-quarter combat, can be used as a hammer against somebody's skull and also as an axe. So this was used quite often by many of the forces that fought in the American Revolution. Another weapon that would have been carried by many people, soldiers and militiamen, would be a scalping knife. And this knife is razor sharp, designed not only for thrusting and killing, but also for taking scalps, which would have been done by grabbing the top part of somebody's hair, coming along the scalp line and ripping it off. And that would be used to count an enemy dead as proof that you killed them. Both sides did it. So the weapons that were used in the American Revolution were particularly brutal, especially these hand-to-hand weapons. If I were standing here on October 7th, 1777, I would be in the middle of one of the strong points that the British had fortified. After the Battle of Freeman's Farm, a month goes by. Burgoyne is running low on supplies. He starts to build and fortify the area that he occupied. And this is a readout a strong point, if you will, called Bremen's Redoubt. And on October 7, 1777, at the Battle of Bemis' Heights, this becomes the focal point of the American attacks, here in another redoubt called Balcarres' Redoubt. The Americans will enter the redoubt behind me. Those red stakes are showing you the extent of the British fortifications. And one of the most important commanders that day was Benedict Arnold, riding on his horse, coming through the redoubt. He is going to be wounded in the leg, almost dies from the wound, but he is the one that really breaks through this and wins the Battle of Bemis' Heights. One of the most interesting parts of the Saratoga National Battlefield are some of its monuments, and this one in particular. This monument is a monument to a man that gave almost his life to the cause of American freedom in October of 1777, and his name was Benedict Arnold. Why a boot? Well, Arnold was wounded in the leg and almost died at the battle, almost lost his leg. That was the second time he actually got hit in the same leg. He was hit first in Quebec in 1775 and again in 1777. Now, why doesn't he have a name? Well, Benedict Arnold was a guy that would betray his country in 1779, and it was so bitter to the American people that they couldn't get over it. Now, we do have to acknowledge what he did here, and he did almost give his life, and he was fighting for the cause of freedom at the time. But his betrayal later was so bitter that we can't put his name on this monument. I'm standing in front of the Saratoga Monument that was completed in 1883, and it commemorates the surrender of Burgoyne's army that took place not too far from here. Now, the monument's an obelisk. You can see the top of it there, which was very popular in the 100 years after the American Revolution. And there are 4 people that are supposed to be honored by this monument, and they're each in an alcove that faces a different direction. Now, this guy in front of me, or behind me, is Philip Schuyler, who was a general during this time, and he is facing actually eastward to his house. And he had a mansion there, and it was burned by the British on their way down to this area. So he gets an alcove. I'm moving now to the northern side of the monument, and this is the alcove which commemorates Horatio Gates, who was the overall commander of the American forces during the actual battles themselves. Now, he's facing north to where the British are coming from, so he is honored by that alcove behind me. We're continuing now to the western alcove, and that is Daniel Morgan, the rifleman who commanded a unit at the battle. He's looking actually westward to where a lot of his forces had fought during the battle itself. And now we're continuing to the southern alcove. Now, what you'll see is that alcove is empty. Now, why is it empty? Well, that's there to commemorate Benedict Arnold, who during this battle was a hero, but when he turned traitor, when they built the monument, they accepted that he did something heroic for the battle, but they just couldn't put his statue up and commemorate his name after he became a traitor. Now, behind me now, when you look at those woods back there, that's where Burgoyne actually surrendered, where his army actually surrendered after the battle, and that's why this monument is actually built here. Behind me is the house of General Philip Schuyler. He was the head of the Northern Department before the battles of Saratoga. And after the Battle of Saratoga, the Second Battle of Saratoga, as the British Army was in retreat, General Burgoyne ordered the house to be burned. which it was burned to the ground. After the surrender of Burgoyne, Philip Schuyler came back to this area and began to rebuild it very quickly before the winter of 1777. So the way that the house looks right now is the rebuilt house, but inside has been completely restored, and it looks the way it did in 1777 and 1778. No trip to Saratoga battlefield is complete unless you go and check this house out as well. Behind me is the monument to the surrender of the Army of Burgoyne after the battles of Saratoga. Now, it may not look like much, and there's just this little park, really, with a little parking lot. But what happened here was going to change the course of American history. After this, France will declare war on England. They will help the United States out with more money, more guns, more ammunition, and it will change the entire war. From this point on, we call it a turning point, and the Americans will get much more help from the French, and our ability to win the war will improve much more.